A few more people will continue to join in, and that's just fine. So welcome to all of you. It's great that you're here. I think we at Public Works, I know that we know many of you and have worked in person and other ways with so many of you. I'm really glad that you could join us for this conversation. And I would like to introduce the other person whose video feed that you can see right now. And many, if not most of you, probably know him. That is Gerard Matthews with Arkansas Advocates for Children and Families. We've had the great pleasure of working quite a bit with Gerard over the last few years, and we think his work and the work of Arkansas Advocates is fantastic. And he was certainly a big part of making this webinar possible and happen. And he'll be presenting later on about some really fantastic work that he's sort of spearheading there in Arkansas. So thank you very much, Gerard. Welcome. You want to say hi?
Yeah, hi everybody. Thanks for having me and listening. It's cool to be here. This is actually working really well. I like this.
Yeah, so thank you. We have been trying out this new Fuse format at Public Works. I hope you think it's helpful. We think it just helps. It's great to put a name with a slide, so to speak. It also allows us to put up all kinds of content, not just slides, but you can show videos. It also later on will allow other people, if you would like to, when it comes time to sort of ask some questions and have a conversation, you can actually indicate that you'd like to have a question. You can indicate in sort of the group chat that you have a question, and we can, if you'd like to, try and video and audio you in if you have a webcam on the computer that you've signed on with. Or you can type a chat in the chat function and I'll just read it out and we'll talk about it. But with this, not only can you see the people presenting and get to know us a little bit in that way, myself and Gerard, but we can also attempt to do that as well with you if you have the right setup. You will need to indicate that you want us to pipe you in and we will unmute you. You would also need to unmute yourself on your end too, just so you know. So welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And again to Gerard. Gerard, if you're welcome to continue to be seen, but if you'd like to hold off on your video feed until it comes time for your part of the presentation, that's fine too. So again, I'm Elaine Mejia with Public Works, and I don't think I need to do much by way of introducing Public Works because hopefully if you're a child advocate and you got this email, then hopefully you're hearing from us quite regularly. But we are delighted to host this conversation today and really delighted to work with all of you and would certainly entertain follow-up requests and invitations from those of you that are here and your counterparts to continue working together in new and great ways. So I think I should just go ahead and jump right into the content that we have for today, which is we've not done this format before, which is we are primarily today going to do two things. One, I'm going to share your wisdom back at you and with you all, wisdom that we collected at a workshop that we co-facilitated with Gerard in, I guess it probably would have been November at the Kids Count Conference, and in which we did a little presentation about what are the fundamentals of communicating more effectively about building public understanding and support for public solutions. But then mainly the workshop was then you all sitting in small groups and saying, okay, what are the issues we're tackling right now as a network, and how can we bring these lessons to bear and create new ways of talking and communicating, or at least refine the ways we're talking and communicating about these various programs, policies, services that we're out there advocating for. So today we're mainly going to do two things. One, I'm going to share with you that great work. We sort of collected it, typed it up, because of course people filled out forms, and I can talk about more about that in a minute. We collected it, typed it up, we're going to share it with you, and then we've asked the person who not only co-facilitated that with us, but has also done such a great job of taking a sort of a narrative and story that he's developed and wants to tell in his community about a particular program, and then used it and sort of infused it into a bunch of creative strategies on the ground in support of a campaign in Arkansas. And that's so Gerard will be sharing that perspective with us in just a little while. So let's go ahead and move on through. And so as you all know, if you've worked with us, we have, and I think surely that you share, just as I said, a longer term goal. Like we seek to not only advance in the current moment, support for specific programs, services, policies, and a more active role for the public sector in solving the challenges that we face, but clearly in doing that in a way that builds long-term, fundamentally changes the underlying the underlying ground, so that we really are changing the culture over time. In the way in which we talk about the services and programs that we're advocating for right now, are we also advancing culture change as well, and really more deeply building that fundamental understanding and support for the role of the public sector, helping people to see the critical role that public systems can, and particularly that they should play in the lives, in this case, in the lives of children, elevating the public child, and employing those strategies that we need to get past this, what we all have come to call the family bubble, telling a story of community benefit as well as just economic benefits, and as well as sort of the benefits that accrue to individuals that might be direct beneficiaries of services, right? Telling a bigger story that we can use to engage the broadest range of Americans and really change their fundamental understanding and support of these things. So what we're going to do today, as I said, I think I've kind of covered introductions and welcome. Elaine Mejia with Public Works, Gerard Matthews with Arkansas Advocates for Children and Families. Then I'm going to get into these great crowdsourced ideas that came out of the workshop from the fall, and sharing back with you, actually as a mirror, your great ideas. And Gerard's going to talk about how you then take a great new narrative that you've developed and a story that you want to tell, and use it very creatively and strategies on the ground in your state to really create the kind of echo chamber that you need to make change happen. And we'll take question and answers. So pretty simple format. So great crowdsourced ideas. Like I said last fall, often in our workshops that we lead at Public Works, and hopefully many of you know this, every time possible when we're with a group in person, we always have people not only hearing from us, but in particular practicing, right? And so in this workshop, we made that most of the workshop, in fact, had you all sit down in small groups and really map out great ideas, and we collected all of that. And like I said, we have not done this format before, but the idea was that wisdom shouldn't just live with us at Public Works. You guys did some great work in that session, and we want to share it back with everybody in the network. So this is a kind of a crowdsourced experiment on our part. The workshop in the fall really focused on two things. Like I said, we did a short presentation of Public Works that more or less covered the fundamental elements of how we're going to tell a public value story about these programs and services and policies in a way that is sort of consistent across all of these programs and policies, and grounded in the best research on how to communicate about these things. And then had put you all to work in writing new descriptions, many of which have elements of how you already communicated about these things, but also pushing you to come up with some new language than we could share with the whole network. The highlights of the core presentation by Public Works that day, and in many Public Works presentation, right, is first and foremost, to sit for just a few minutes on what are those dominant hurdles in people's minds. What comes back to us when we want to talk to people about public programs and services. And you certainly can get back lots of stereotypes and myths, but there are some that actually researchers have shown that some actually present real hurdles that we actually have to get through and address as we want to build support and understanding. And the first one is what you get back is sort of, it's just bickering politicians. They're really not serving the greater interest or the common good. And the second is it's this large, wasteful bureaucracy that sort of eats my money. I think the issues of red tape, and then in our crowdsource workshop with you all, there will this idea of sort of waste, fraud, and abuse, and how that's a particular hurdle certainly came up a lot. And this idea of a vending machine, people default to thinking about government as, I only want to pay for those services that I get. I don't have a child that needs I don't need a subsidy to pay for my child's daycare, and I don't have children in school, or so on and so forth, right? I only want to pay for those things that I benefit from. And that is the sort of the default thinking. So these are these three big fundamental hurdles that we face. And these are hurdles that cross any issue area or policy area that you really want to work on. So the ultimate conclusion then, right, is can't solve anything, and it's not my responsibility. And so how are we going to reframe this? Well, it's this slide certainly probably makes it look more simple than it is, but we know first and foremost we have to lead with our values and lead with the bigger picture mission and purpose. Like, why do these programs and services fundamentally exist? First and foremost. Then we have to pair that up very quickly with simple and clear explanations about what these systems actually do on the ground with families and communities, and use images when possible that help people see what this is. And we need language that also makes these things seem tangible and like structures, things that we have built over time that we need to maintain because they serve all of us. And then finally, we always need to be number one, not triggering that consumer thinking, not triggering the, hey, it's just about what's in it for me, but always triggering the inner citizen, if you will, and triggering that citizenship thinking or the civic mind, always giving people a role to play, and not triggering that consumer thinking. So that's just the bigger picture highlights. Obviously, working through these, we can spend a lot of time on those, but that's just a refresher of what we would have covered sort of at this crowdsourced workshop in the fall. So get people shifting towards seeing public systems and as our tool for solutions. It's all about the common good. And we just have to consistently and very actively know that when we're in conversations about particular programs and services, that is a conversation ultimately about government. And we just have to assertively and actively, consistently defend government's role, in this case, particularly in supporting children and families. What we did in the workshop. So like I said, we presented for just a little while on sort of what are the core elements of changing the narrative and changing the conversation, kind of like what I just went through. And then we had people get in groups and pick out a specific program or policy that they are advocating for or really needing to communicate about or anticipating that they will need to communicate about in the near future. And working together in small groups to do a couple of different things. First, we have people think about what are the stereotypes, public attitudes that are sort of getting in the way of people having a better understanding and support of this particular program. And then how will you talk about that in a way that leads with the values, the mission, the purpose, gives people simple and very easy to understand ideas of how does this system work, what role does it play in the community, and always making sure that you're always plugging in language that reinforces this idea of civic responsibility. You can see on the slide here, these are the list of the particular programs and services that people broke into groups and covered that day. So for the purposes of this workshop, I can't show you everything that everybody produced that day. I will say when we work on follow-up materials to this webinar, we'll summarize what people did on all of these topics. But in particular for the webinar today, we're really going to cover SNAP and PreK. And I know that's pulling a lot of things together. And PreK, that looks very different in different places and means different things. So hopefully what we'll cover from that is general enough that it can apply to your circumstance in your state. So, and hopefully these ideas, even if you're working on a different policy area, it'll get you thinking about how would you implement these ideas into not only the programs and services listed on this list, but more generally. So when we asked you all in the workshop to identify what do you think are those roadblocks in the public mind, it's the list you came up with is fantastic. We pulled out a few highlights for the purpose of this workshop, but this was a very rich list. Obviously, the family bubble, right? The ever-present challenge that we have in breaking through somehow this notion of a sacrosanct, perfect space and that is best left alone, and where the public role is somehow inherently harmful, and so on and so forth. And that just being this consistent challenge that we all face when we're communicating about these programs for children and families. This idea about sort of public funding used for perceived private benefits. So people perceiving either food stamps or childcare, whatever it is, as I'm paying for it, but somehow it's really only benefiting these few individuals in their private lives, more or less. And scarce resources in competition with other programs, right? This idea that when we're out there publicly communicating in states, all these great programs, whether it's pre-K versus public education and so on and so forth, are being put in competition with one another, when in fact they all ultimately are sort of linked together in a sort of continuum of things that need to be in place, and that's a particular challenge. This idea that particularly when you're talking about things to do with children, that people only want to think about sort of long-term benefits rather than sort of immediate. And that is, on the one hand, a terrific thing, right? Because you're able to talk about it as an investment and show long-term savings and such. But on the other hand, when people and lawmakers want to make every year's budget conversation about, well, we can only do what we have the money for right now, that obviously presents some challenges as well. And then just sort of a lack of and some stereotypes came up under the category of kind of lack of knowledge, right? People think somehow the services that are provided are inferior or poor quality, and we know there's just ample evidence that that's not the case. And this idea that somehow there's a lot of overhead and red tape and bureaucracy and so much administration that's somehow siphoning off a lot of the resources for these things, not true as well. And then this idea of stigmatization of programs, whether you're a mom that's getting a home visit or somebody who's accessing SNAP to pay for your grocery bill. There's a stigmatization associated with that, and that's a challenge. So, I mean, the roadblocks that you all presented were fantastic. We could have separate conversations about lots of these, but it was really a great list that you developed, and it certainly gives us a sense of, what our challenges are. So I'll say this is what this slide represents is when we look at the forms that were filled out by the groups who work specifically on PreK, this is what the kind of language that people included on those forms. So we talked about values, you've got things about readiness and how it helps graduation, ultimately saves around juvenile justice, less need for remediation, competitive advantage for children. In systems, people talked about how it provides a preschool experience above and beyond childcare. People seem to have an interest that wanting people to understand that these programs differ. There are various funding streams, right? Not just one. It's about access for all children. People talked about fiscal responsibility, cost effectiveness, right? A lot of work went into this. There's some really, really good stuff on this list. Now, that being said, let me shift to, if at Public Works, we were to add, from our perspective, make some small amendments and add to this list, here's what we do. So we talked about leading with values. Sometimes we see a lot of language that's getting so close to being a value, but isn't quite there. Like even, for example, graduation rates. It's great. It's an example, but a value that it's associated with would be something more about sort of building for the future, making for the brightest possible future. I mean, that's ultimately sort of what graduation rates are about. Somebody mentioned juvenile justice. Well, right, you could point to the specific benefits ultimately to juvenile justice system by investing in PreK, but really the value that helps to accomplish is something more along the lines of prevention. Similarly, we also thought something like competitive advantage for individual children kind of triggered a bit more of an individualistic sort of approach or mindset about a public service. So we scratched that one off. In our opinion, that wouldn't be something that we would consider a value that sets you up for the right overall conversation about government and public services. And similarly, we added one here, sort of around family economic security as well. So great work done by the groups. And then here's a few additions, like I said, from Public Works. Some of the listings about how you describe systems were fantastic. I think getting into specific funding streams is probably, you might need that in certain circumstances where you really need a lawmaker or someone else to understand how this thing works. But in your bigger picture, opening salvo about how are you going to begin a conversation with somebody about this who's not steeped in it like we are, that's probably not where you want to go. Similarly, we also added just a basic statement here about we need just a basic phrasing and statements that explain really what we're talking about when we talk about PreK and public education and how they work together. And then finally, with civic thinking, I think this is a tricky one, but generally speaking, I think talking about and leading pretty high in your communications about cost effectiveness could trigger a lot of sort of running government like a business thinking, and we should only be kind of doing those public things if they're cheap and so on and so forth. It's not to say that you don't need to be really armed with being able to show how cost effective this is. You absolutely do. But putting it out there as a lead and sort of your public communication is probably not the best idea. And we also often need to think about the way in which I'm setting up this program is also the way I'm then suggesting how people should evaluate all the other programs and services that we think are a good idea and that our organization's advocating for it. So that's something else to keep in mind with a term like cost effective. I think fiscal responsibility gets at that same idea. And similarly, when we talked before about competitive advantage for individual children and perhaps not leading with that in your communications on these issues, similarly there was this phrasing that came about your child's education is slowed when other children are not ready to learn. And it sort of sets up a competitive rather than a sense of togetherness and how this improves everybody. And because as we said before, one of our bigger challenges here is it's really about telling a broader story about how this benefits the larger society and the larger community. And then finally, always needing to say something about how people can be part of the solution. And that will differ on where you are in your campaign and what you're really able to plug people into, but triggering that civic thinking whenever possible. So we then took the specific phrases that were put together on these big categories, values, systems, and structures, and mapped them out here on this slide. You can see that there was really good stuff in there. The stuff that's in blue is generally what we picked up from the worksheets that were filled out by groups that day, and then we added to it, just filled it out a little bit, from our perspective at Public Works. Some great stuff, a great opening lead, right? Pre-K is more than childcare. And then we get some specific, trained teachers, low student to teacher ratios. Like, what does that mean that it's more than childcare, right? High quality education to all of our community's 4-year-olds. And again, with the need to insert some more values words, we threw in the word prevention and even a more common sense idea about what we mean about prevention, right? It's about getting ahead of our problems. That's been an effective way to get people to want to talk about things that are long-term, right? And again, striking out cost effective. And then you guys had some great language in here that we thought was fantastic. It's all still in here. We left it in. Exactly why this helps kids, right? They're more ready to read at grade level, graduate on time, connecting it to a future, to the future of these children and ultimately the community. And again, we took out the language about sort of competing children one-on-one, but more about, kids doing best when they're all progressing together. And finally, civic thinking, right? We all benefit when students succeed and are able to contribute to the community. We changed that language a little bit because it really originally came out as when people are able to enter the workforce, which is valid, and it is a future-oriented story, and so that way it's good. But sometimes we have a concern of Public Works about kind of over monetizing the benefits of ultimately what this is about. There are so many ways in which people ultimately might contribute to their community if they get a better education, right? Starting with pre-K, whether that's citizenship thinking or citizenship things they might participate in, or being a leader in their community, starting businesses, so many different ways. I feel like limiting to thinking of them just as future workers felt too limiting. So therefore, we all have to support this. And then giving, usually in your own campaign, right, then you would plug that in with exactly what we mean by how can you support it. So you can see this narrative here, more or less, ultimately need to put these things really into your own words, but you see it has all those 3 core elements we talked at the beginning. Triggers systems thinking and explains a little bit about how this actually works. It's got some strong values about the future and about community and about prevention. And it's got some civic thinking as well about togetherness and interdependence and giving people a role to play. So the second thing that we're going to cover today that was covered by groups in the room in November was around SNAP. And this is certainly good timing, right? Because there's a whole new national conversation, for better or for worse, emerging around this program. So some of the language that people filled out on the worksheets that day around values, we had people said, hey, our state and local economies benefit from this. Absolutely. So that's going up one level in your story to more of a community story, right? It's not just about the individual recipients and how they benefit. People talked about stabilizing families and households, allowing children to succeed over the long term. So again, it's got a future orientation in there. So that's great stuff. People talked and we had some particular concerns about this language in the middle. It's got strict requirements and the fraud is minimal. So often we feel like we need to lead in our communications with what we feel like have been the big public criticisms about the program. And I want to say you absolutely need to be armed with what you need to say if somebody brings up fraud or abuse or how much this costs. That should never be part of our opening lead conversation, whether it's in a handout or in an op-ed, or if you've only got a few minutes with a lawmaker or whatever it is. You need to be prepared for it, but we don't want it front and center in our public communications about these things. And you guys had some great statistics about who's actually benefiting from this. And there was some civic language too. SNAP works for all of us was fantastic. That's the one at the very bottom. We had an interesting conversation here on our team about this. Somebody said, well, what if we talked about getting people to think about, hey, what if we didn't have this thing in place? What would the cost of society be? Which on the one hand could trigger a bit of sort of crisis thinking or making people think how bad things are right now, or how bad things could be, excuse me. But on the other hand, that's a great exercise to go through as an organization or as a team, because what it forces you to do is really to articulate the vision for the program. So what would society, I might rephrase that a little bit. So what would society look like if this were fully functioning the way it truly needs to be? So I think that's strong to have that in here, and you might want to think about rewording it a little bit. So there's good stuff here. Like I said, though, we did have a few suggestions to offer all of you. So our state and local economies benefit every day. We talked about family stability and economic security, adding some more values language in. As I've already said, we felt like if you were to lead with some of the language that was put out on sort of systems, it would really cue up a stereotypes about waste rather than what we need around systems, which is simple explanations of how this program actually works. And you never want to use too many numbers. You want to pick your very best 1 or 2 statistics and embed it in your narrative and make sure it supports the broader narrative, and really limiting this to a few of us. And so, and then of course that language around SNAP works for all of us. We also, I guess the final comment on this slide and some of the work that came out of the work groups on this, somebody had put in their worksheet about sort of talking about the fact that churches and charities can't fill in the hole that SNAP really fills in our communities, which is a great point. But on the other hand, I do think that leading with that in your opening conversations is probably more of a distraction than anything, right? We need to articulate first and foremost why this should be a public system, why this is a bigger public challenge that needs public funds. And therefore, from that, people could naturally conclude, or we could even follow up by saying, that's why then churches and charities can't fill in this hole. So it's really a question more about ordering. For those who are interested, we actually wrote an article that we posted on our website a few months ago where we specifically got at this question about what do you say when somebody comes at you with, hey, shouldn't a charity or a church really provide that? And we just basically listed a lot of good responses to that we feel like are framed pretty well. So we'll throw that into the resources page when we send up a follow-up email to this webinar. So then finally, we pulled out sort of the elements of a new core narrative about SNAP that people developed that day. And there was plenty that we could take directly from you all or from the participants that day to make for a great great little opening narrative here. And we have added to it some little elements that you'll see here in red, right? And so SNAP, right, which is many people still call the food system, promotes the well-being in the whole community. And the local economy gets a boost. So a lot of people just threw out this idea that this benefits the economy. But in 1 or 2 people, when they filled out their worksheets, actually explained how, which I want to back up those people and say that really is so important. Say a little bit about how. I mean, we kind of make this assumption that people will understand why the economy gets a boost from these things, but you need a little language that really shows how. So the economy gets a boost as funds are spent directly at area businesses who employ workers, right? They buy from local farmers, etc. And then again, we've got more values in here that came out from your work: greater economic stability and the future orientation, right? Allowing children to succeed over the long term. Instead of talking so much about waste, we really talked about how well it's designed. It's a success story, talking about the number of people that were helped, one of our nation's best kept secrets. So leading with how effective it is, and then being prepared to follow up and answer questions about waste and fraud if you need to. You had great statistics in there about who's really on, who's benefiting. And then just towards the end, people had some language about we all have a responsibility towards this, and we just added that because it's a vital part of our community. We all have a responsibility, and that's why we as our organization need you too. And then presumably, right, you have to fill that in with whatever makes sense in your campaign at the moment. So you can see then that those core lessons that we started out with, that leading with values, I mean, values are what answers that why question for someone, even if they don't see themselves as particularly benefiting. If they share that core value and they want to see that value emulated in how their community works, that's the opening thing that you need to connect them and get them interested in hearing more about what this is and why they need to engage. And a little bit of systems language and thinking. What does this actually do? How does it work? And then finally, always triggering sense of togetherness, sense of interdependence, and giving people a role to play. So we're triggering that civic thinking and not just the consumer thinking, which is what's really dominates these conversations. Gerard, just this morning, we asked rock star Gerard Matthews if it was okay if we shared these. As I said, we've worked a lot with Gerard over the last few years, and we recently, when we were trying to schedule meetings with him, he had a certain period of time which he couldn't meet with us because he was getting married. And we asked him to send us some pictures, and we had an incredible amount of fun, as you can see with this one, because these cake topper people are so perfectly represent Gerard and his wife and are so adorable. So we asked him if we could share that by way of introducing him. And I know many of you who would be joining us today certainly know Gerard and probably see him at conferences and stuff. So we thought you might enjoy these as well. And as I said before, so Rockstar Gerard Matthews is going to talk about how sort of once he and his team went to go through this process of sort of figuring out what's the story we want to tell. And you match that up with really creative strategies that create an echo chamber, and you think about who are interesting messengers that would match up well with what our story is around this, and then just roll with it. We thought the work that he's been doing there was so great that we asked him if he would share that with you all. So, on to Gerard.
Thanks. That's quite an introduction.
And congratulations, Gerard. So.
Thanks. I'll say what everybody's like stereotypical thing, like I married up, obviously. But yeah, thanks for the introduction. I like the title of Rockstar. That's pretty cool. I want to apologize a little bit in advance if I work right by a train station. So there's trains going by just right over there. If there's noise, that's what it is. So yeah, I was in on this workshop with Public Works, and there was a lot of good info that people came up with just from getting around a table and talking about, okay, what are the obstacles we're going to overcome? What are the main values we want to hit on? What are our main messages that we're going to use when we talk about any one of these issues? And just from people getting around and talking about it for 15, 20 minutes, we come up with some really good stuff. And we do a lot of that around here. At the beginning of the session, when we're starting to talk about, okay, what are the main issues going to be? How are we going to talk about it? What are the problems that we foresee? And generally at the first of a session, which we just got out of our legislative session, at the beginning of it, the policy lead will write down some talking points. We'll kind of send that around the office. We'll all put our 2 cents in on it and come out with a document that, we put on the shared drive where everybody can always go back to it. If we're going to do an interview about PreK, or if we're going to write a paper about PreK or an issue brief or an email, we can always go back to that first kind of initial talking point email that has all these things listed. So, and not to bore you with all the funding stuff, but here in Arkansas, PreK, there was a really significant investment in PreK years ago, and then there was a tiny little bit more money put into it. But then for the last 8 years, there's been nothing. So we really kind of wanted to stress really how ridiculous it was that a program that was such a good investment, and this has just been proven again and again, we haven't invested in it since 2008, which is over 7 years ago. So that was kind of the one main point that we wanted to get across. Like, we all know this is good. We're not putting our money where our mouth is here. Of course, that's all based on the value that PreK is a good investment, and trying to, also convey that message in terms of civic thinking that, PreK is an essential building block to our education system, our economy, and our future, and the kind of place we want to be, and the kind of climate we want to create. So again, we use sort of our main talking points to, we wanted to kind of keep that message simple. And, we had an issue brief called 5 Things You Should Know About PreK in Arkansas, which we didn't use enough, regrettably, but it was on our website for people to see. One of the cool things I think we did, and when I was just trying to think of, how are we going to illustrate this stuff for people? That idea of like the amount of time that passed since we had done this, I really wanted to find a way to, capture that and use it, and, have something that would kind of form the basis of our communications that we could kind of put out there over and over again. My friend happens to be a web developer and made this great clock that you see here. It ticked by. It was, years, months, days, hours, minutes, and seconds. So it was constantly moving. And so I had that as sort of this basis. We, promoted that on Twitter and Facebook and all kinds of stuff like that. But then in every, press release or email or newsletter or action alert that we sent out, when we repeated that line, PreK hasn't had a dime of new funding since 2008, I would link to this clock to where people could just go and click on it and just see the seconds ticking by, which was actually pretty cool, and it got shared a little bit like on Twitter and stuff. But it was a good, just a good little tool to just kind of show that passage of time, and I really liked this. One thing that we have been trying to do more and more over the past couple of years is think about our messengers. Once we have this message in place, what are we going to do with it, and who's going to say it, and who will lawmakers listen to? Unfortunately, lawmakers get tired of hearing from us all the time. So when we went through the fight over Medicaid expansion, we tried to find doctors who would talk about it. We tried to find people that would benefit, that would talk about why this program was so important to them. With PreK was no different. Lawmakers want to hear from their constituents, and the people that they look to listen to on issues like this. And you have a lot of allies out there and partner organizations that you work with that can help you find these people. So, for instance, there was a woman who leads a early childhood education coalition, and she was out doing some outreach work at a pre-K center, and interviewed a couple of moms that were there to pick up their kids. And she just took a video on her iPhone. She sent it to me, and I put it on YouTube, and we put it out all over Twitter. So, it wasn't just us telling lawmakers that this was a good investment. It was, a mother who takes her kid to pre-K every day and really wanted to see further investment by the state to keep these programs going because it was so good for her community and for her family. So that was one. Then we had a couple of national partners that did some work here in Arkansas, which was really helpful. There was a sign-on letter of evangelical leaders. We knew that was a group that our lawmakers probably wanted to hear from. So, there was probably, 20, 25 pastors who signed on this letter. So I just took a screenshot of every signature, and we tweeted out on every half hour. Evangelical leaders like Richard Atkins and Bono support pre-K. And so we had these tweets going out with that constant reminder that this was a group, wasn't us, that was supportive of pre-K. There was the similar law enforcement letter. But one of the best messengers that we had actually on here was the governor of Arkansas himself. In an interview in the northwest part of our state, the governor had sat down and he had said, so I am, like, he was going on and he said, so I am committed to increasing the funding. So I just took a video of him saying that. This was right around the time when Twitter started to allow you to put a jiff in a tweet. I think Barack Obama has confirmed that jiff is actually the correct pronunciation, so I'm going to go with that. But so I just Googled, how to make a GIF and found this site. I put in our YouTube video. I cut out that little part of him saying, so I'm committed to increasing the funding. And I think I had this scheduled out to go out just almost every day, at least once a day. This was a really popular tweet. It was cool to look at. It was kind of funny, and it tagged the governor in it. People retweeted the heck out of it. This ended up being a really good message for us, and two, it was just fun. People liked sharing this, and anyway, so this was an instance in which we actually had a really strong messenger, although he probably wasn't as big a fan of this as we were. So we wanted to keep our messages simple. We wanted everybody always talking about it. We were always talking about it, but we wanted other people to talk about it too. So we tried to come up with, some really shareable stuff and look for opportunities to get that message out, that message that pre-K needs new funding, and it's been too long. So when Valentine's Day came up, I made this, show pre-K some love graphic that we started to share and circulate. And we actually sent this, via email to some of our partners and stuff so they could put it out on their social media accounts, and it actually really took off. And the other thing that was really cool is that every year on Valentine's Day, or every time when there's a legislative session going on, our hashtag for the legislature is ARLEG, ARLEG. Every year at Valentine's Day, some reporters a few years ago started an ARLEG Valentine's, where people try to out funny and outsmart each other all day. So I knew that there was going to be a lot of people on this hashtag. So I came up with this image of our governor with our Show PreK Some Love logo. I thought it looked like one of the Valentines you give somebody when you're in second or third grade. And this got a lot of traction for us too. It actually ended up being really good, and it got pretty widely shared. We also made the picture that you see on the far right. This was a huge, basically a big Valentine's Day card that we made for the governor. We had education advocates from all over the state sign it, and we actually delivered this to his office on Valentine's Day. So we had a simple message, and we had some kind of cool ways to show it and talk about it and share it. And it was so simple that it actually worked. It caught on. People in the community started doing their own stuff with it. And, people that we wanted to have as messengers took this thing and kind of made it their own. I was watching tweets go by all day where people were saying Show PreK Some Love, and I didn't even know who they were. Like, I don't know who this guy Brandon is. I don't know, but he was tweeting our message at the governor. And the tweet that you see on the right with the little girl, this was a PreK teacher, and she ran like wild with this. She drew up a couple of those Show PreK Some Love graphics on her own, started taking pictures of her students, and she really turned out to be a really, really strong social media advocate that was turning out tweets just at an amazing rate. It was really really something to see, and we were really happy to have it. And two, for me, it created this thing where somebody else was generating content for us all the time. I would check our Twitter feed and just retweet a few of these images that she had already went to the trouble to put together and put out there. So this was just a really successful little thing. It was all built around kind of that simple message of PreK needs new funding. It's been too long. And then in the end, we were asking for $16 million in PreK funding. That's what it would have taken to make up a cost of living increase over the time that it hadn't received any new funding. So we're asking for 16. We got 3, which I guess is good in this world. The thing is that this was a really, really, really super tight budget year, and a lot of programs got cut. Libraries got cut. Community health centers got cut. So in a year where people were getting nothing or even less, $3 million actually seemed like somewhat of a victory. So we said thanks anyway, and our messengers did too. And like, as you can see, this PreK teacher, she sent out a stream of tweets of her kids thanking our governor and the legislature and all that stuff. So this was, Elaine went over how you can kind of take yourself through these steps and arrive at a good message for your organization. I really wanted to, take all that and kind of say, once you've got this, what do you do with it? And so anyway, I hope this has been helpful. This is just, one campaign that we've done. We work on a lot of issues, but so this is always changing. But we're going to try to take some of the stuff that worked here and continue to use it. We don't see any reason not to. So as long as we're not wearing people out, we'll kind of have some of this stuff to continue to distribute. So anyway, that's my presentation.
It's great, Gerard. It's great. And thank you. Folks can see Gerard's got his contact information on here for everybody too. And we'll have that when we, of course, send out the follow-up information.
I'm always on Twitter if people want to find me, or
Oh yeah, that's a great idea, so they can see what you're up to.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about it if you want to call or whatever too.
Thank you. I want to share a couple of observations about, from the public works perspective, about a couple of things that just went through my mind as you were going through this that I think are so fantastic. So I'll start here. So, one thing we've seen from great research that's been done is about, particularly in these budget debates, how important it is to expand the time horizon, both forward and backward, right? So, because, people are, the default is to say, well, we can only spend just only the money that we have now, and there's no way to do anything else. And if people can force it to be a conversation about just what we can afford to do or not do right now, and with what little resources we have, it forces sets of constraints around these debates that never kind of leads to sort of these longer term conversations about what really needs funding. Do we need more funding? Do we need to raise revenues, and so on? So that's what stands out to me about this first slide, for example. Not only are you able to talk about since 2008, which is sort of going back in time a little bit, you're able to connect it. Obviously, your story about it's an investment. This is worth it. This is the way we build the best future for Arkansas. Expands it well out into the future. And then your clock also visually takes people into the future. And this is so important, particularly in these budget conversations. So that's one observation there. I think that obviously looking at leaders who can tell a broader community story, right? Well, why this is worth it to everybody to make this happen now. And of course, this was fun. I had a question about this, Gerard, which was, so when you said when this was tweeted out, did the tweet actually include the tiny video clip, is what you're saying, the little bitty piece of it, right?
Yeah, and it just cycles over and over again, and it's him like actually saying the words.
Okay, I thought that's what you meant, but I wasn't sure, so that's fantastic for lots of reasons. And then I wanted to say here, what I really like about this, so when you're the people, I know so many people who are with us and inside of this network are the experts in what the very real consequences are to families that can't make this happen, cannot get their kids in high quality pre-K, or can't afford to do it, whatever. It is so easy to want to default to, even with things like this, to things that are about a sort of a bit of a crisis story or a negative story about here's what the waiting list is and here how much this costs. But what I love about what you did here is it's aspirational. Like, you're still being real about what the consequences are, but you're sort of leading more with an aspirational story about why we need to sort of put our money where our mouth is, to use your words, right, and invest in this now. So I like that even when you're looking for these opportunities, you're looking towards these sort of aspirational ones, and ones that allow people to show smiling pictures, like, aspiration. This is about building a great future for all of us. When I know the reality is it's also about the not so great current future, current moment for families and stuff that can't access this. On the other hand, being able to tell this aspirational story and in pulling ourselves out of the default to tell the crisis story, what the shortfall, just hammering on what the shortfall is all the time, or how long it's been since we've been funded, or how expensive this is for families to do on their own. We need all of that, but we need this too. We really need these aspirational stories. So that's what I really liked about that one. So we could go on and on, but thank you. That's just really helpful to see how you took once your organization and really worked through developing a narrative of how you can make this happen. We've got some time. If people want to indicate in the group chat that you've got a question, you can type it in there, or you can alert us and we will attempt anyway to allow you to pipe in your video or audio feed through your computer. I want to mention that we have a couple of resources specifically on our website that are connected to this conversation. We have a longer, mainly longer because we put in a lot of more instructions, type of stuff we would say in person if we were to hand you a worksheet to do some of this. But if you want to sit down as a team or as an individual and work through this process that people work through at the workshop that we were talking about earlier, we've got a tool on our website about how to tell a public system story, how to make your story bigger. It's one of the tools we have on our website. You can do that as a team and then send it to us. We'd be glad to look at it. Similarly, we were talking before about the need to broaden your story beyond the individuals that would kind of more immediately benefit from this, and be able to tell a bigger story about how the community, how the economy, how the future benefits when you do those things. So we've got another tool on our website, for example, that's called it's called ripple effects, more or less, which is sitting down as a team and saying, okay, we're very familiar with how this benefits the individual beneficiaries in the moment, but let's spend some time as a team mapping out all of the ways in which, when you invest in this, whether the way it works now or if we're going to have more resources, all the ways in which those effects ripple out throughout of our community, and then figuring out which of those you want to incorporate into your narrative and which messengers match up to those bigger stories. So the couple of tools we think would be helpful. And as you said, if you want to fill them out and get some input from Public Works, we would just absolutely be delighted, to receive any of those. I wanted to mention also, we're working on some more tools around sort of this question about how we're going to build public support for solutions and investments for children and families. We're working on not only sort of a web-based presentation about what we think are sort of the fundamental communications recommendations for people working in this policy area. We're also working on a fun graphic timeline tool that's actually moments throughout American, in some cases state history, in which government took a step to do something fantastic for kids, whether it was something around child labor laws or all kinds of things. And that can be shared around, and you can also use it to find media moments where you can tell, as we were just talking about here, a more positive story about what it looks like when we do the right thing and make these decisions happen, how those decisions have sort of gotten us to place that we are in many instances. So that's something else to look out for. We'll be sending all of this around, all these resources around, not only the recording for this and the slide for this, but some more information and from follow up to workshop, the links to these tools that we were just talking about, and to links to some other tools that we sort of have in the works right now. So all that just to say, at Public Works, we love working with this network of child advocates and groups like Arkansas Advocates for Children and Families, Gerard. So reach out to us whenever if you want to bring us in for some kind of a presentation, or if you just want us to, we're about to launch a new campaign, take a look at something, we'd be glad to do it. So please keep in contact with us. I don't believe I'm seeing any questions come up in the group chat, but people certainly know where to find me at Public Works and know where to find Gerard as well. So I don't want to necessarily push folks or make us all wait around for questions that might not appear. Did you have any other? So I should mention one other tool I neglected to mention. We have started a private, if you will, or an exclusive sort of Facebook page that is, we're going to certainly share resources there, but we also want it to be a conversational place, a place where somebody can throw out a tough question, a question where, let's say, communication research hasn't completely answered it, and we can sort of hash out some stuff there. So you can see the website here, and we'll also send a link to this in our follow-up email to this webinar. So if you can't grab the link right now, then paper, that's fine. We'll make sure everybody's invited. Like I said, it's a private space just for all of us to really kind of hash some things out, raise those tough questions in a safe space where we can work some of this through, because there's tremendous research out there, but it also is true that we need people out in the field trying these things out and reporting back, just like Gerard is. Here's what worked, or here's when I brought up and tried out this new narrative, here's how it worked, or here's a group or an audience that it didn't work with, and giving us that kind of feedback too. Public Works is fantastic. Because we love to share the research with you and share our ideas, but we want this to be a two-way learning conversation as well. So I don't see any questions, Gerard. So I think we should just let people go on about their workday. We will send the recording of this and all of the other tools and links that we talked about. Thank you very, very much, Gerard Matthews, the rock star in Arkansas. And we will be in touch. Thanks for joining.